The Spin-off Podcast Network.
Raising capital or taking your business to the world? Investment Fix has everything you need to make it happen. This season, we're exploring the US market, the opportunities it offers, what it takes to grow a business there, and the best way to approach investors. The Investment Fix podcast. Tune in today.
The Fold is brought to you by oOh!media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa. Hello, and welcome to a very special episode of The Fold. I'm your host, Duncan Greive, and I am recording this on Friday afternoon, on the 27th of March, underneath the towel via Zoom and my iPhone, because that is apparently the way that we live now. And I'm doing this as a monopod, which, those of you who listen to that sort of weird, slightly crazed episode of Real Pod that I did late last year will either recoil or rejoice at, depending on your taste. Doing it almost out of necessity this way. Not that I can't get people on the line, but I feel guilty. I feel guilty about a lot of things right now. It's a very emotional time, but anyone who's working in the media who I'd want to talk to is working their asses off at the moment. They certainly don't need to spend an hour on the phone to me to try to make sense of this thing. But that's exactly what I'm going to do. The Fold is a podcast about the media, about the New Zealand media, and this institution, this industry that I work for and in, has been, like all others, hit in the face by Covid-19, by this virus that sort of there started to be murmurings about in the media in January, and has just risen to become the biggest story of our lifetime. And that has had profound implications for the media around the world. I think it's brought out the absolute best of us. It's also placed a lot of us in mortal peril. I think it's inevitable to say that that the media will never be the same. In fact, it's kind of almost trite at this point, because it'll be true of our species, and every industry will be transformed by this event. But this podcast is about the media, and therefore that's, broadly speaking, where I'll stay. And I mean, it's sort of hard to know where to begin. It's a really extraordinary event to view through the media's lens, both because we are covering it with every sort of beat of it that we can, while also absorbing it on a personal level, while also figuring out how to do our jobs from home. This is true of a lot of industries, but there's, I don't think it's belittling anyone else's what anyone else is going through to say that this has been extremely intense for all of us in the media. And the thing that I keep coming back to is that it shows not the flaw in, but the sort of the danger of the ad-funded model, which has been the basis of so much of our media is mostly or near entirely funded by advertising. And we're in this very bizarre twilight zone where interest in what we create has not been higher for years, potentially never been higher. The COVID-19 story is a worldwide one. It is incredibly complex and multidimensional. It is constantly in motion, like the virus itself. If you stay away for a few hours, you feel like you're sort of living in the past, because you just it moves so fast. Huge events can happen such that your understanding of the world is no longer current just because you've had an afternoon, doing something with your kids or binging a show. I think, but the main thing is that news ratings are way up. Online traffic is through the roof. Our own site over the last week we've had 3 million page views. Well, that would put us, I think, the third highest ever month in spin-off history, and we did that in a week. I'm sure that every media outlet could cite similar statistics that are just, beyond the realms of anything they've ever experienced. But the brutal irony of it is that under normal circumstances, a news event has a direct impact on revenue, in that, you sell more newspapers, you get more eyes on the television, you get more clicks on your stories, and you get more advertising dollars as a result. But because this is such a total whole of economy shock, the disease and the sort of prevention of it through lockdown, no one is advertising. One of the things which really shocked me was watching The Bachelorette the other night, and I was watching this ad and I was like, well, what is this for? There was like a sort of a janky looking Instagram handle came up, and it was really low production value. And then I realized it was for Thin Lizzy. It was essentially like a cut down infomercial playing, during one of the year's big priority shows on TVNZ2 in prime time. And, you just think about the events that could possibly make that occur, and it's great for Suzanne Paul, I suppose, in terms of buying some very distressed inventory, but it's a disaster for TVNZ, who spent a huge amount making that show and now have to sort of deal with the fact that they can't remotely recoup their investment. The other ads you see are, there's power companies and Tim Tams, and that's kind of it. The odd car ad, a lot more house ads, but for various other TVNZ shows. But I think television's a very, very expensive medium to make, and that's why, despite having pretty good ratings and a lot of profile, TV3 has struggled so much over the past few years. And God, if selling that channel was a difficult job, and before this, it's sort of unimaginably difficult now, and yet, so you've got all the eyes in the world and no one to sell them to is the sum of it. The government's taking up a little bit of that slack with its Covid-19 campaign, but nothing like enough to redress the fall everywhere else. And you got to feel for the people working in television, because their jobs have never been more important. They're doing the best work of their careers. You watch the bulletins now, and they're so full and they're so textured. And I was watching TVNZ1's bulletin last night, and they had the perspectives of the Pacifica community. They had like a roadblock up north. They've got reporters everywhere doing really, really important work, and it just doesn't pay. And they're running out of content. They've taken Shortland Street back to 3 days a week. And even that, that show, which is just a machine, like they're sort of, as soon as they finish a scene, they start cutting it. It's admired around the world, SPP's making of Shortland Street. And they have a certain amount of lead time, but it's a matter of weeks, not months. And, they've gone back to 3 days a week. They may well run out of Shortland Street if this lockdown goes on long. Now, that's not a huge thing in the scheme of things, but what it is emblematic of the fact that television it's not just in time production the way there are with some industries, but it's not a million miles off. That they have a production line, they have their planning, and we're just gonna run out of shows, because there won't be. Not only are they not making them here, they're not making them anywhere. Dancing with the Stars has already been delayed. I think that will probably be cancelled in part because almost like a taste thing, like the idea of two relative strangers in such close proximity, even if you didn't have a live audience, I think that there'll be some part of it that just doesn't read right. It's like my colleague and podcast co-host Alex Casey sort of alluded to, when you watch The Bachelor now and you see the extent to which they're sort of touching one another's faces and kissing, and you're just like, it scans so differently in this era when we know what, we're constantly told how careful we have to be with our interactions that were previously so routine. The block is delayed for 4 weeks for now, but is likely to be delayed for longer. The really hard thing with television productions, whether they're reality or scripted, is that they're very cumbersome beasts. They take a lot to sort of wind up and wind down. And the best case scenario with the level alert system that we have going is that we might get let out to a 3 or a 2 by region from time to time, but at any point there'll be a risk of us being sort of scaled back up, and potentially very quickly when there's more community transmission while they try and stamp this thing out. And given the huge cost of packing up and packing down and the sort of logistical side of it, that I think it's entirely possible that what we see on our screens will be a combination of reruns, sort of very tightly managed studio shows, and just a lot of stuff that is kind of edited or brought out from archive. It's really hard to imagine this thing not going on for a much longer time than we're currently anticipating, and for it not to just for normal service in terms of the making of television, it's going to be very hard to resume, let alone the whole economic impact of it. The other thing it's doing is because you've got so many people at home all at once, perhaps using services like Zoom, like Hangouts, like FaceTime to communicate for the first, some of them for the first time, or certainly using them in a much more concerted way than they ever have before. That's sort of training people to think about their devices for video. So I do wonder if this will, I'm not going to predict the death knell of linear by any means, not that I haven't before. But I do think this is just the mother of all social experiments, and I think there's a very good chance that we're teaching a huge number of people how to consume media in a different way from before. And so I'll just move on a little bit to Sky at this point, because they're just in such an awful position. They paid huge sums of money for rights to sports, which, on one level they're doing okay because they don't have to pay for those sports because they're just simply not being delivered. But sports has been the thing that they've hung their hat on. The CEO, Martin Stewart, basically said, this time last year, he said, you'll go broke trying to outbid us, which meant that he was very comfortable spending a lot of money acquiring a lot of sports rights. None of those sports are happening, and they're doing a great job. They've got a fantastic archive. They're putting things on the air, and personally, I quite like watching classic matches, but I don't think that's a mass activity, and it certainly doesn't have a forever timeline. And all those people whose lives had been built around the routine of a Friday and Saturday night watching sports, they're in play now. They're learning new routines. Maybe they'll start to watch, Netflix shows with their partner. Maybe they'll start reading books. Whatever it is, they're very likely to get a long period of time before they can watch sport again. And, some of them aren't coming back. That's just the nature of habit. And, so that has a flow-on effect into sport. I think, you look at New Zealand Rugby, hugely reliant on Sky. I mean, it's a shareholder in it after last year's deal, but it also, it's a very large amount of its income comes through Sky. I think it's entirely possible the All Blacks don't play a game this year. If they do, it'll at best be in an empty stadium, so you lose all the ticket revenue as well. So that's a business which is phenomenally challenged, and until there's a worldwide vaccine, it's very difficult to see top-level sports coming back in any meaningful way. I watched the Warriors on the weekend, and it was kind of poignant the way that they were trying to battle on to complete the quarter so they could get one more payment. But also at the same time, it was just sort of jaw-dropping given how prevalent Covid-19 is in Australia, and the fact that a game of rugby league, if you want to take one person and infect 26 people, then that's what you'd organise to do it. So, but every sport has got a tremendous problem out of this, and I think that the way that flows on to media companies that were heavily invested in that sector is going to be something to witness. Now, obviously, Sky has a lot of other content. It has the Soho channel, it has movies, and everyone's at home, so people may well be watching that. And they also have in Neon and Lightbox some strong demand offerings of their own. The fundamental danger, though, is obviously that they get a lot of people, potentially unemployed or worried about their income, cancelling their subscriptions, and they just like TVNZ, just like 3, they have very high fixed costs. They can get rid of a bunch of contractors. I've no doubt there's some difficult conversations happening out there in Penrose at the moment, but fundamentally, they, even trimming costs, they're still kind of caught in a real bind through this, and if it goes on too long, and 10% of their income or thereabouts is through advertising, that could go to not far off zero as well, especially with they will be losing ratings through sports, which is where a lot of their ad revenue comes from. Spark, on the other hand, they're giving away their product till the end of May. Well, there's almost nothing on it that's new anyway, but the great thing for Spark is that their core business is not sports. And so if Sky were to encounter problems, they can sweat this thing out essentially forever. Sports are nice to have for them. And then at the other end, A, a lot of people have been trained to be consuming content online, and B, they will be there to essentially as a borderline monopoly to buy sports rights if Sky were to fail through this. And, so it's a enormously challenging situation for the what you might call the sort of traditional end of the television market. Unfortunately, the likes of Netflix are very parsimonious with the statistics that they release around consumption of their products, but I would bet that when the dust clears on this, that Netflix is easily the biggest single channel in New Zealand in terms of, say, a total hours watched, something like that. Just you couldn't design a better event for a company like that to train millions of people here and all over the world to consume their product. And it's such a beautiful user experience, and it learns you so well, so fast that they've done very well out of it. Unfortunately, the likes of Disney, whose stock is off, I think 25% odd since this happened, very exposed through their cruise business, through their theme park business, through retail. So they're hit there, and Disney Plus, which already had launched with a big bang, I think a lot of us subscribed, they just really needed new content, and they don't have enough in the pipe or in the can that it's basically, apart from Frozen 2, there's not a lot that's coming to it. So a lot of the new services which either have launched or are launching will struggle, I think, to make the claim that they are, worthy of your dollars. I just want to move on to talk about the sort of the more what you might call the news media in New Zealand, or the what was formerly the newspaper business, NZME and stuff. Just like the journalists on 1 and 3, doing such great work. All of them out of their offices, they're essential workers, so they're working. I just look at my staff, and our Slack starts up about 5 a.m, finishes about 2. And I'm sure it's even more so at the Herald and stuff. People are doing brilliant work on this. But my God, like the Tuesday's Herald freaked me out. It was like as thin as Aviva. And it wasn't because there was less stories in it, it's because there was almost no advertising in it. And, full of great journalism. They've committed to continuing to deliver it throughout the pandemic, throughout level 4. But, that's an ad-funded medium, and there's no ads. The NBR has already bitten the bullet and stopped their print thing, which they've been wanting to do for a while. But, that I think that will present challenges to it, and it is sort of emblematic of just how fast that happened. That sort of tells you something about, how close to the bone a lot of media are doing it. Speaking personally from the spin-off, we had, huge clients just not pay their bills from February on March 20 when we normally expect it, and that's not something we've ever experienced before. I'm relatively young. The spin-off wasn't around for the GFC. It didn't strike me as possible that big companies would just not pay their bills. And yet I understand it. If you have to choose between paying your people or paying your bills, pay your people first and see what's left. But it does make it very hard. And yet at the same time, you're doing the most important work of your lives. And I think, I've watched our people through this. Toby Manhire's probably worked 20 days in a row and no less than 12, 14 hours a day through that. And as a result, the spin-off, which I don't know, if you'd asked me going into this, said that there was a sort of a health, science, economy emergency coming, the likes of which no one had ever known, and how do you think your team will do? I've just said, well, that doesn't necessarily sound like it's our kind of a crisis, if such a thing exists. But the team has just stood up and done the most amazing job. And not to dwell too long on our own thing, but a large part that's because, or if we make it through, will be because of the response of members. We've had just an amazing, I think we've had 50% month-on-month rise in memberships as the result of our coverage. Obviously, the likes of Susie Wiles and Toby Morris's collaborations have really helped there. But I think just everyone involved has under Toby's piloting and with Alice and Catherine as deputies, really done some of the best work of their career and done it from their homes. And that kind of thing will be happening everywhere. I'm sure if I were to talk to Mark Stevens or Murray, it's Mark Stevens at Stuff or Murray at the Herald or Murray, like they could talk for hours about things that they've seen from their journalists, and the public appetite for and need for good, fact-checked, rigorous information. I can't imagine that will ever be greater in my lifetime. But without anyone advertising, your ability to pay the bills is so limited. And that those government wage schemes and loan schemes, they're great for small business. They're basically a business like the spin-off. We're sort of, we're not home and hosed, but those schemes were designed for businesses at our scale, 20-odd people. You could just about, it sort of helps you pay your wages. Once you get up to a particular scale, especially if you're carrying a lot of debt, the way a lot of media companies are, it's very very hard, even with the government loan guarantees and all that kind of thing. Like it just doesn't really touch the sides. Now that's not a criticism of government, because this is a whole of economy problem, and I think I've never had so many phone calls from concerned people in relatively senior positions in government agencies than I have over the past week. So they're definitely very aware of it. Maybe a package is coming, who knows? But I think one thing that we have which will come out of this, is the realization that, ad funding has always contained a huge vulnerability, and even though this is a sort of a multi-dimensional supply and demand shock, I think it sort of does hasten the not the demise of the ad funding model, because I think that will always be there, but the demand for that media have other direct-to-consumer revenue streams that are of a meaningful scale, because you need to have something more than advertising. When in normal times, when you're dealing with Google and Facebook, let alone when you have an event like this happen. I won't spend a lot of time on this because it's the medium I know least about, but even radio is so exposed here. That industry is, one of its huge strengths is that it works very well regionally. Therefore, it works with small businesses. The small business sector is, they're the ones who stop spending fastest. They're the ones who have, who are most exposed, are most likely to go bankrupt, will be most reticent to start spending again. They're the least likely to have good sort of online payments. Very many of them aren't essential services and don't have a plausible path to being them. So radio is just very exposed. And even more than that, radio is a commuter business. It relies on people in their cars. Radio loves a traffic jam. People are at home, and just like with linear television, the way that people are learning to watch online services, even more so, people will be discovering podcasts, discovering Spotify, and when they get back in their cars, whenever that is, they might have different listening habits. So, even the great cockroach of the media is threatened by this. It's just a very, very grave and complex crisis for the media. And obviously, in the scheme of things, it's not who cares, because I think everyone is gravitating towards information. But certainly, there are public health dimensions and overall economic dimensions and many other things which vastly supersede the media's bleating, and we have been bleating for probably 10 years now, and as someone who's been the source of a lot of that within New Zealand, I have to acknowledge that. But everything I was saying before, it's not like it has changed. The powerless resourcing and just the general pain of the sector, what is still there fundamentally, and now it has the mother of all shocks. So, I am so impressed by the way that my colleagues in the sector have stepped up. I'm so impressed by the way my own staff, for everyone from video to commercial to members to editorial, there hasn't been a person there who hasn't just wowed me with their work. But you also know that it comes with a cost, and that it can't last forever. This no revenue or very low revenue type situation. And to be honest, I can't record podcasts under a towel forever. It's very hot, and I do feel quite strange. So I'm going to leave it there. This has been The Fold, the Spin-Offs Media podcast for March 2020, a month I'll never forget. That was The Fold, brought to you by our partners at O Media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa. Huge thanks to O Media for sponsoring this episode of The Fold and enabling us to make unmissable connections with Kiwis.
Ready to rediscover the joys of cycling? With over 300 kilometres of cycle paths across Tāmaki Makaurau, jumping on your bike and going for a ride is such a fun way to discover the city from a different perspective. Cycling is getting more and more popular across Auckland, so now's a great time to join the hype and give cycling a go. Head to at.govt/cycling to find your nearest cycleway today. The Spin-off Podcast Network.